Some people carry invisible poison. They walk among us, speak our language, even smile at the right moments. Yet something deep within them operates like a machine designed to destroy. Not with violence, not with cruelty you can see coming, but with patterns so subtle, so ingrained, that they unravel lives without ever leaving fingerprints. You might work beside them, love them, trust them completely, unaware that you are interacting with someone whose very nature creates chaos wherever they go. Carl Jung, the brilliant mind who mapped the human psyche like an explorer, charting unknown territories, understood something that modern psychology often overlooks. He saw that certain personality patterns aren't just quirks or bad habits. They are entire systems of being that can turn a person into an unconscious destroyer of relationships, dreams, and peace. Jung didn't just study the mind, he studied the soul's capacity for both light and shadow. And what he discovered about these dangerous types should change how you navigate every relationship in your life. Tonight, we're going deep into the psychological underground. We're exploring 6 personality types that Jung would have recognized as profoundly dangerous, not because they mean to harm, but because they cannot help themselves. These are people trapped in patterns so destructive that they poison everything they touch, including themselves. And the most terrifying part, you might recognize one of these patterns in someone you love, or worse, you might recognize one in yourself. The human psyche, Jung discovered, is not a simple machine. It's an ecosystem of conscious and unconscious forces, constantly pushing and pulling against each other. When this system falls out of balance, when one aspect becomes too dominant or another gets completely suppressed, something dangerous emerges. A personality that operates like a psychological virus, spreading its dysfunction to everyone within reach. Jung believed that every human being possesses what he called a shadow, all the parts of ourselves we cannot accept, cannot face, cannot integrate. For most people, this shadow remains manageable, controlled by a healthy ego that knows how to keep dark impulses in check. But for some, the shadow takes over. It becomes the driving force behind every decision, every relationship, every interaction. And when that happens, you get these dangerous types. The first type might be sitting across from you at dinner tonight. They light up rooms, command attention effortlessly, and seem to thrive on social energy like plants thrive on sunlight. Everyone loves them, wants to be near them, wants to bask in their apparent confidence and vitality. But Jung understood something about extreme extroversion that most people miss. When someone becomes completely dependent on external validation, when their entire sense of self relies on the outside world's approval, they become hollow inside, dangerously hollow. The overly extroverted person has lost all connection to their inner world. They don't know who they are when no one is watching. They have no authentic thoughts, no genuine feelings, no real substance beyond the performance they put on for others. And this creates a terrible hunger, an endless need to consume attention, validation, and energy from everyone around them. They become emotional vampires without realizing it, draining the life force from others to fill the void where their authentic self should be. Jung called this psychological type shallow and sterile. They think in cliches, feel in formulas, and live entirely on the surface of existence. But the real danger isn't their emptiness. It's their desperate need to avoid that emptiness. They will manipulate conversations to stay at the center. They will create drama to maintain attention. They will violate boundaries, exhaust friends, and destroy the peace of any environment, rather than face the terrifying silence of their own company. You know this person. They cannot sit alone without checking their phone constantly. They interrupt others because they cannot bear not being the focus. They make everything about themselves, even your moments of celebration or grief. They seem supportive and caring, but somehow you always leave their presence feeling drained, like something essential has been taken from you without your permission. On the opposite extreme lives another dangerous type, one that Jung recognized as equally destructive, but in a completely different way. While the overly extroverted person drowns in the external world, the overly introverted person disappears into an internal world so deep and disconnected that they lose touch with reality itself. These are the people who live entirely in their heads, in fantasies, theories, and ideas that have no connection to the actual world around them. Jung observed that when introversion becomes extreme, it turns into a kind of psychological prison. The person retreats so far into their own mind that they can no longer function in relationships, work, or society. They become what Jung called schizophrenic in their introversion, completely cut off from the collective human experience. But the danger isn't just their withdrawal. It's what happens to their emotions when they refuse to express them healthily. Jung noticed that overly introverted people often develop mysterious physical symptoms, vague illnesses, and chronic conditions that doctors cannot explain. Their repressed emotions, having nowhere to go, turn inward and begin attacking their own bodies. They become walking time bombs of suppressed feeling, and eventually, that pressure has to go somewhere. When these people finally do engage with the world, it's often through explosive outbursts of rage, bitterness, or criticism that seem to come from nowhere. They judge everyone harshly because they judge themselves harshly. They criticize the world because they cannot participate in it. They become bitter observers of a life they feel too scared or superior to actually live. You recognize this type too. They are the perpetual outsiders who claim everyone else is shallow, stupid, or fake. They are brilliant in isolation, but toxic in groups. They promise deep conversations, but deliver monologues about their superior understanding of everything. They make you feel foolish for enjoying simple pleasures, guilty for being happy, and exhausted by their intensity and judgment. The third dangerous type operates from an even darker place. These are people driven by unconscious forces they cannot see, understand, or control. Jung spent much of his career studying what he called complexes, these autonomous psychological systems that can take over a person's behavior like a hidden puppeteer pulling strings. When someone is driven by unconscious complexes, they become predictably unpredictable. They explode over tiny things because those tiny things trigger massive unconscious wounds. They sabotage their own success because deep down they believe they don't deserve happiness. They destroy relationships that threaten to give them the love they simultaneously crave and fear. Jung observed that people with unresolved father complexes might spend their entire lives either desperately seeking approval from authority figures or rebelliously destroying every structure they encounter. Those with mother complexes might become either eternal children seeking to be cared for or controlling parents who suffocate everyone around them. The specific complex doesn't matter. What matters is that these people are not making conscious choices. They are being lived by unconscious forces. The most dangerous aspect of this type is their complete lack of self-awareness. They genuinely believe they are acting rationally, making good decisions, and responding appropriately to situations. They cannot see the patterns that are obvious to everyone else. They blame others for problems they create, feel victimized by consequences they bring upon themselves, and repeat the same destructive behaviors over and over while expecting different results. You know this person. They are the friend who always dates the same type of person and always gets hurt the same way. They are the colleague who creates conflict wherever they go, but always sees themselves as the innocent victim. They are the family member who explodes at holiday dinners and then cannot understand why everyone walks on eggshells around them. The fourth type might be the most dangerous of all because they often appear to be the most successful. These are people Jung called one-sided, individuals who have developed one aspect of their personality to an extreme degree while completely neglecting or suppressing everything else. Picture the brilliant scientist who has mastered logic and reason, but has the emotional intelligence of a child, or the deeply feeling artist who drowns in emotions but cannot think clearly enough to function in practical matters, or the sensation-focused athlete who knows their body perfectly but has never developed any capacity for reflection or deeper meaning. Jung understood that healthy psychological development requires integration of all our capacities: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. When someone becomes extremely one-sided, they create what he called unconscious conflicts that tear them apart from within. The neglected functions don't disappear. They become primitive, reactive, and dangerous. The one-sided person becomes a walking contradiction. The hyperlogical type will suddenly have emotional meltdowns that seem to come from nowhere. The overly emotional type will make decisions so illogical they destroy their own lives. The sensation-focused type will ignore obvious warning signs until disaster strikes. The overly intuitive type will miss practical details that ruin their grand visions. But the real danger is that one-sided people cannot relate to others as complete human beings. They only see and value the aspect of life they have developed in themselves. The thinking type dismisses everyone's emotions as weakness. The feeling type sees logic as cold and heartless. They become fundamentalists of their own limited perspective, unable to appreciate the full spectrum of human experience. You know this person. They are the boss who makes perfect business decisions but destroys every personal relationship. They are the counselor who can help others with their emotions but cannot organize their own life. They are the spiritual teacher who speaks beautifully about love but treats their family with coldness and judgment. The fifth dangerous type hides behind a mask so convincing that even they forget it's not real. Jung called this mask the persona, the role we play in social situations, the image we present to the world. For healthy people, the persona is a tool, something they can put on and take off as needed. But for some, the persona becomes a prison. These are people who have become so identified with their social role that they have lost all connection to their authentic self. They are the perfect mother who has forgotten she is also a woman with her own needs and dreams. They are the successful businessman who doesn't know who he is when he takes off the suit. They are the helpful friend who gives endlessly to others because they have no idea what they themselves actually want or need. The persona-trapped person lives in constant fear that someone will see behind their mask and discover there's nothing there. So they work harder and harder to perfect their performance, to be more helpful, more successful, more whatever their role demands. But this effort exhausts them because they are constantly performing instead of living. Jung observed that when someone becomes trapped in their persona, they lose the capacity for spontaneity, authenticity, and genuine connection. They can only relate to others through their role, never as one real person to another. Their relationships become transactions, their emotions become performances, and their lives become elaborate theaters where they are both the actor and the audience. The most heartbreaking aspect of this type is that they often seem to have everything together. They are the ones everyone admires, the ones who appear most successful and well-adjusted. But inside, they are dying the slow death of spiritual starvation, cut off from their own essence, living someone else's life so perfectly that they forget it's not their own. You know this person. They are the friend who always says, "I'm fine," even when they're clearly not. They are the parent who has given up every personal dream to be perfect in their role. They are the colleague who defines themselves entirely by their job title and falls apart when they retire or get fired. The sixth and final type carries perhaps the heaviest burden of all. These are people Jung would recognize as fixated, or stagnant, individuals trapped in psychological patterns from their past, unable to grow, change, or adapt to the natural flow of life. Jung understood that psychological energy, which he called libido, needs to flow and change direction as we move through different stages of life. What motivates a teenager did not be what motivates a 50-year-old. The goals, values, and behaviors that serve us in one phase of life become toxic if we cannot let them go when it's time to evolve. But some people cannot make these transitions. They remain emotionally stuck at whatever age they experienced their deepest wound or greatest triumph. They are 40-year-olds still trying to please parents who have been dead for decades. They are 60-year-olds still competing with siblings over childhood rivalries. They are adults still believing the stories about themselves that they learned when they were too young to question them. Jung observed that when psychological energy becomes fixated, it turns toxic. Instead of flowing toward growth and new experiences, it circles back on itself, creating what he called the terrible burden of aging and early death. These people don't just grow old, they decay while they're still alive, becoming more rigid, more bitter, more closed off with each passing year. The fixated person becomes a living ghost, haunting their own life with outdated patterns that no longer serve them. They cannot form new relationships because they are still fighting old battles. They cannot embrace new opportunities because they are still mourning old losses. They cannot become who they are meant to be because they are trapped in who they once were or who they think they should have been. You know this person. They are the adult child who still defines themselves entirely by their childhood trauma. They are the divorced person who cannot stop talking about their ex-spouse years after the relationship ended. They are the former athlete who peaked in high school and has been declining ever since. They are the parent who cannot adjust to their children growing up and leaving home. These 6 types represent what Jung saw as the greatest dangers to human psychological health. Not evil in the traditional sense, but patterns of being that create suffering for both the individual and everyone around them. And here's what makes this knowledge so crucial. These patterns don't just appear randomly. They develop for reasons, and they can be changed if we have the courage to face them. Jung believed that the antidote to all these dangerous patterns is the same: individuation. The process of becoming aware of these tendencies in ourselves, integrating the rejected aspects of our personality, and developing into whole, balanced, conscious human beings. This doesn't mean perfection. Jung never advocated for perfection because he understood that trying to be perfect often leads to exactly these kinds of one-sided, dangerous patterns. Instead, he advocated for wholeness, for the difficult but necessary work of accepting and integrating all aspects of ourselves, both light and shadow. The overly extroverted person needs to develop an inner life. The overly introverted person needs to engage with the outer world. The unconscious-driven person needs to become aware of their patterns. The one-sided person needs to develop their neglected functions. The persona-trapped person needs to discover their authentic self. The fixated person needs to let go and allow their energy to flow toward new growth. But this work requires something that many people find terrifying: the willingness to be disliked, misunderstood, and rejected by those who benefited from your unconscious patterns. When you stop being overly available, overly agreeable, overly predictable, some people will not appreciate the change. When you start setting boundaries, speaking your truth, and living authentically, those who preferred your old persona will resist. Jung understood that individuation is ultimately a lonely journey because it requires you to stop living for others' approval and start living for your own psychological health and spiritual development. It means choosing wholeness over happiness, authenticity over acceptance, growth over comfort. If you recognize yourself in any of these dangerous patterns, don't despair. Recognition is the first step toward transformation. Jung taught that what we can see, we can change. What remains unconscious controls us, but what becomes conscious gives us choice. The goal is not to eliminate these tendencies entirely, but to become aware of them so they don't run your life unconsciously. Even the most psychologically healthy person will sometimes be too extroverted or too introverted, driven by unconscious complexes or caught in old patterns. The difference is awareness and the ability to correct course when you notice yourself sliding into dangerous territory. Your personality is not your destiny. These patterns feel permanent because they've been running unconsciously for so long, but they are actually choices you make moment by moment, day by day. Every time you choose consciousness over unconsciousness, integration over one-sidedness, authenticity over persona, growth over stagnation, you move away from these dangerous patterns and toward psychological freedom. The people in your life who exhibit these patterns also have the capacity to change, but only if they choose to do the work. You cannot fix them, save them, or love them out of their unconscious patterns. You can only model what conscious, integrated living looks like and set boundaries that protect your own psychological health. Jung's great gift to humanity was showing us that we don't have to be victims of our unconscious patterns. We can become conscious. We can integrate our shadows. We can individuate into whole, authentic, psychologically free human beings. But this work requires courage, commitment, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves and others. The most dangerous person is not the one who intends to harm, but the one who harms unconsciously, automatically, compulsively. And the most powerful person is not the one who controls others, but the one who has achieved conscious control over their own psychological patterns. These 6 types are not just categories for judging others. They are mirrors for examining ourselves. They are warnings about where unconscious living can lead. And they are invitations to begin the difficult but liberating work of becoming who we truly are beneath all the patterns, personas, and unconscious programs that have been running our lives. The journey of individuation never ends because there are always deeper levels of consciousness to explore, always more shadows to integrate, always more authentic expressions of ourselves to discover. But each step on this journey moves us away from unconscious danger and toward conscious freedom. And in a world full of people operating from unconscious patterns, becoming a conscious human being is perhaps the most radical and necessary act of all.